In the early 20th century, when Detroit's industrial fortunes were booming and the city's wealthy elite began seeking quieter lives beyond its borders, one man helped define what that new life could look like by building a palatial estate in Grosse Pointe along the shores of Lake St. Clair. Hi everyone, Ken here. Hit that subscribe button and let's explore this house. Born in 1873, Russell was the eldest son of General Russell A. Alger, a Civil War hero, lumber magnate, U.S. Senator, and Secretary of War under President McKinley. While the senior Alger built a stately mansion in Detroit and left behind a legacy of political service, it was his son who pushed the family name into the next chapter of American industry and innovation. Alger Jr. had business in his blood. After a year of working in the lumber camps in Manistee, he was promoted to oversee timber tracts in Canada, where he met and married Marion Jarvis in 1896. By the turn of the century, Alger returned to Detroit to take on the role of treasurer at Alger Smith & Company, the family lumber firm. But he was already setting his sights beyond the timber industry. In 1903, he became one of the earliest investors and the first vice president of the Packard Motor Car Company. His influence helped persuade Packard to relocate its operations from Warren, Ohio to Detroit, forever cementing the city's identity as the motor capital. Not content with only the road, Alger also took to the skies. In 1909, he became an investor in the Wright Company, founded by the Wright brothers, and owned the first privately held commercial airplane in Detroit. At a time when flight was barely out of its infancy, Alger was already backing it. A man of action and ambition, Alger also valued home and family. He and Marion had 3 children and spent summers along Lake St. Clair in Grosse Pointe. In 1910, he hired Charles A. Platt, a rising star in architecture who had recently returned from Italy studying Renaissance gardens. Platt envisioned a home that felt like it had always belonged to the land, a harmonious blend of house and landscape. What he designed was an Italian Renaissance-style villa built on one of the highest elevations along the lake. They called it the Moorings. Constructed of solid concrete and trimmed in limestone, the house was stately but never stiff. With red tile roofs, sweeping terraces, and pergolas draped in grapevines, the residence was meant to give the impression it had been plucked from Tuscany and placed gracefully along the Michigan shoreline. And in staying true to its Renaissance inspirations, parterre gardens were planned in quiet seclusion amongst mature trees, and the lawns flowed from vast empty spaces into tight corridors of flower-lined walking paths. While the family would frequently bring their boats around to dock at the lake-facing facade, I prefer we arrive by automobile and swing around the fountain to find the main entrance. And as the car comes to a stop, we can imagine the family staff opening the doors and welcoming us into the house. Let's take a quick look at the floor plan to orient ourselves, noting that guests would have been directed straight to the Great Hall, which doubled as the reception room and living room. This was described as the soul of the place, as it welcomed each guest with sweeping views of the lake on one side and colorful tapestries on the other. In the wintertime, we can imagine a roaring fire being tended to at all hours by the help, ensuring that the Great Hall remained comfortable and welcoming. To the right side of the Great Hall, we pass around the fireplace to find the library with floor-to-ceiling bookshelves filling the gaps between each window. And if we look up, we find rosettes carved into the center of each section of the coffered ceiling, with delicate relief work further emphasizing and joining each panel in a cohesive design. In later years, the wall treatments and bookshelves were removed, really opening up the 946 square foot library. However, key architectural elements remained, including the coffered ceiling and the Italian stone fireplace mantel. Now, had we traveled to the other side of the Great Hall, we would have found the dining room resplendent with tapestries draped over rich wood paneling. We can imagine the gilded coffered ceiling gently catching the light reflected from the waves just outside the windows. And before we continue on, we can take a moment to appreciate some of the other smaller details, from the mantel's relief work to how perfectly each wall panel is fitted. The dining room feeds us into the conservatory with sweeping, uninterrupted views of Lake St. Clair. Upstairs, the 6-bedroom layout for the family prioritized views and light for the women of the household. Marion and her daughters had the rooms with the sunniest exposures and the best views. The Algers hosted garden parties, swam off the boathouse landing, and entertained on the lawn. On sunny summer Sundays, guests in flowing dresses and bowler hats gathered for tea and lawn games. It was a golden era, a slice of genteel living on the American frontier of wealth and style. But it wasn't all leisure. Alger was a hard-changing businessman, and in 1921, while riding in a fox hunt at the Grosse Pointe Country Club, he was thrown from his horse not only once, but twice. The second fall left him permanently paralyzed. Though confined to a wheelchair, he remained mentally sharp and continued to manage his interest until his passing in 1930 at only 57 years old. Following his passing, Marion Alger stayed in the house for a few more years before offering the home to the Detroit Institute of Arts in 1936. For over a decade, it functioned as a satellite branch of the museum, but by 1948 the arrangement had run its course. The house was returned to the family, and in 1949, the Algers gifted it once more, this time to the people of Grosse Pointe. The Moorings became the Grosse Pointe War Memorial, dedicated to the memory of local veterans of World War II. But it wasn't just a tribute, it was a community hub. Over the years, additions were made and the formal gardens gave way to parking lots and performance halls, but the soul of the house remains. And with that, I'll turn it over to you. What did you think about the Moorings? Let me know down below in the comments section. And while you're there, make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an exciting episode of This House.